All right, Brandon. Well, we're live, man. So, you run the nonprofit organization Utah Homicide Survivors.
Yeah.
Holy cow, man. Tell me about that.
So the Homicide Survivors name can be a little confusing.
Okay.
Because most people look at it and go, okay, did you were you almost killed and then you weren't?
Yeah.
And so really what it means is the surviving family members of homicide victims.
Okay.
So usually the children, the parents, sometimes the spouses. A lot of our work is like domestic violence homicides, though, which is usually from the spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend or partner in some way.
Yeah.
And so the way that we determine who the survivor is usually the innocent family member.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's intense. Like, I wouldn't have thought that. Like, that would be, I mean, is it a big kind of like market, I guess, for lack of a better word?
I mean, it's an underserved area of the victimization world. So there's a lot of different victimizations out there. I mean, sexual assault, rape, stalking, burglary, any kind of victimization where a crime has been committed and it affects another person. Yeah, that there's a victim there, and so we are there for specifically our group is for the survivors of the homicide victims. Yeah, and that can range in number. Utah has about 70 homicides a year. Sometimes we've been as high as 90 before. Wow. So it can vary. But the main thing that we've found is from different studies that have been done across the country is that for every homicide, there's 3 to 10 survivors. Wow. In Utah, we're on the higher end, closer to that 10 range, just because bigger families and things like that. And so how they count survivors in those studies is depending on who committed the homicide, the spouse, the children, the parents, and the siblings. Wow. So, I mean, you got to think in Utah that can be quite big, especially if the person is older and has kids. Yeah. And then it includes their parents and their siblings and their children. And that can get pretty deep. So it can get pretty big. Yeah. And so we help with anything that they might need as far as legal stuff goes. So we help with the estate. A lot of people kind of don't understand what that is, but when someone dies, it's how their stuff is distributed and who it should go to. And so we're there to make sure, number one, it goes to the innocent family member or the family members, the heirs. And if that's children, we make sure that those assets are protected so people can't come in and take advantage of the children's assets that are there to take care of them. Oh, yeah, no kidding. So life insurance, home insurance, or homes, cars, bank accounts, things like that. We are there to make sure that the heirs are going to get that, the right heirs, because like I said before, a lot of the cases are domestic violence related. Yeah, so... And in Utah, it's about 43% of all cases, all homicides are domestic violence. No kidding. Which is quite high for the rest of the country. The rest of the countries are in the 20 to 25% range. As far as like of all the murders perpetuated, like 20% of those are domestic related. So in the rest of the country, that's the average. We're not even the top 10 for states, but we're pretty close, I would think. But about the nationwide average is 20 to 25% of all homicides are domestic violence related. Wow. But in Utah, we're at 43%. That's nuts. Yeah. That's super. And you wouldn't think that, but that's right. But just like in other types of victimization, most victimizations happen from someone that you know or have an acquaintance with at least. Right. Most crime is not random. Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of weird to think of it that way. And I think a lot of people don't like to address that because it makes us feel more vulnerable that it's going to be someone we know that's taking advantage of us in one way or another. Well, that's true. I feel like that's true just in like whenever any kind of harm happens, right? Yeah. Normally it's not somebody that you don't know. Yeah. And like, we always teach like stranger danger. No. Yeah. It's actually. It's people you know. That's the scariest part. That really is the scariest part of it. And even with homicides that are not domestic violence related, it is still the majority of times someone that they know in one way or another. That's nuts. Yeah. That's crazy. Very rarely is it random. So how did you get involved with this? So I went, So let's go back a little bit, I guess.
Yeah.
So I went to my undergrad at Utah Valley University. When I started there, it was still UVSC.
Okay.
But by the time I had graduated, it was UVU. And I did a degree in international politics. I was trying to get into the foreign service, working at embassies and things like that.
Yeah.
Didn't make that. It's a really, really hard process. I made it probably to the final or second to last round. I just didn't know another language, and so they kind of cut me.
Man.
But they do these things there where if you make it, like, they will pay you to go and learn another language, and then they'll send you to the country of the place you learn the other language.
Oh, wow.
And then they just rotate you around embassies all over the world, kind of thing. So that sounded awesome to me.
Yeah.
But didn't make it. So I was like, all right, next thing is law school. I wanted to go and do environmental law. So I found Vermont Law School was, and at the time, and it still is, top 1 or 2 of environmental law schools in the country.
Cool.
Took some environmental law classes, and I hated every single second of it. Just hated it.
Yeah.
It was miserable. And I think it was because I wasn't interacting with I learned that I wouldn't be interacting with the people that I was trying to help. Either I would be working for big corporations trying to get the government to go away, or I'd be working for the government trying to go after the big corporations. And yes, it is very important and it does affect people, but I wouldn't meet the people that I'm helping.
Sure. That makes sense.
And even if you were to go work for a nonprofit like Sierra Club or, Greenpeace or whatever, it's just not the same. And so I found an internship with a group down in Arizona that doesn't exist anymore, but they were around for 20 years before they closed down, that did legal work for victims of domestic violence and domestic violence homicide.
Oh, cool. Wow.
So I kind of got involved in it that way. So I worked for them for 3 years, and then opportunity came to move to Utah and open up a branch of actually their office. But then, so I started that technically in July of 2018.
Yeah.
But then by March, they had lost their main government grant funding in Arizona. So they just decided to close up shop. And they were like, hey, if you want to do something, you can. You have our blessing, but you can't, they even said I could use their name, but I didn't want to because I didn't want to. I wanted it to be my own thing.
Yeah.
And so started all brand new again 9 months basically after I had started that. Yeah. And so that's where Utah Homicide Survivors was kind of born. And so that name to me says more of what I was doing than the other name, which is why I chose that. Yeah. And there are other homicide groups across the country, but most of them are focused on therapy.
Okay.
Which is now a part of ours, but we only started that this year.
Right.
So as far as that goes, we're probably one of 2 organizations in the country that provide a full service, all universal type of all-encompassing care for homicide survivors. And the other one is in Arizona. So when that other organization shut down, they added a legal component to their organization.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I would say that their therapy component is way more in depth than mine is.
Sure.
And my legal is way more in depth than theirs is. So, I mean, and we learn and we collaborate with each other. They're really great people over there, and I really like them. And so it's nice to have other groups that are like that, because we're definitely learning from each other. And it, like I said, this is an underserved community because nobody would know about that. Like you see the initial news you see the news. Yeah. And then you see nothing.
There was a recent case here in Utah that I saw, in a couple news outlets, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it was a mother and a father who were murdered. Yeah. Right. And they had 4 kids. They had some kids or something like that. But it was quite a bit of kids. It wasn't 1 or 2. Yeah. And I was like, what happens to those kids? You know what I mean? That was the first thing.
And you never hear about it. Yeah. And you won't hear about it again until the sentencing.
Jeez.
Because, he escaped, and this isn't a client of mine, so I'm free to talk about my observations of it. But not that
I'm with you.
I would love every homicide survivor family to call us, but we're so new, it doesn't always come up.
I'm with you. Yeah.
But basically, I think from what I remember happening, he fled. He was trying to recross the border so he wouldn't get arrested. They found him. they brought him back to Utah, and now he's awaiting charges or has charges, and he's awaiting trial. Yeah. But we won't really hear much about it in the news until the sentencing or the trial. Yeah. And that's how it happens. You get the initial news thing, tons of news coverage. The family's overwhelmed with everything because there's news coverage, but they also have to plan a funeral. Yeah. And then they have all the legal stuff that they have to deal with on the criminal side, but then they've got to see, like you said, who's taking care of these kids.
Yeah, and what happens to them. And it feels like, well, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody taking care of them like physically, but like, yeah, what happens with like therapy, what happens with their parents' stuff, like how does that all go?
Who's taking care of them, how do they support them? Because a lot of times, sometimes grandparents are taking care of them, they're retired.
Yeah.
Now they've got kids again in their late 60s, 70s, or other siblings might be taking care of them, but now they've got all of a sudden 4 extra mouths to feed, and they weren't planning on that. And Holy so cow. Like how do they
so how does your organization help with something like that?
So with if they were working at any point during their life, Social Security is there. And so basically we get Social Security, we sign them up, we help them sign up for Social Security benefits, survivors benefits. So it takes care of those kids until they turn 18. Right. It's not a lot. It just depends on how long they worked and how much money they were making at the time. But it could be anywhere from a couple $100 a month to $1,500 or $2,000 a month. It really just depends on what they were making and how much longer they have until they're 18, because Social Security is trying to pace it out as well.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah.
So, and there's 4 of in that case, but it just depends on how many kids there are too, things like that. And it can be even more complicated if it was like a split family where there's kids from different moms or dads, just depending
like
on
a mixed
who.
Kind of thing.
So
Holy cow.
How they split that up between the 2 or 3 or 4.
So that's a lot of legal stuff.
A lot of legal stuff we have to deal with.
And you have to deal with that without your organization. You have to deal with that on your own while you're doing all the other stuff going on.
And so we basically tell everyone, look, any paperwork you get, life insurance, car insurance, home, mortgage, well, not mortgage because you got to pay those, but still send them to us. But like things like that, bank statements, medical debt, things like that, send that to us. Let us take care of the legal stuff. You just focus on surviving. Yeah. Because that's really the most important thing they need to do, because they're in trauma too. Yeah. They just lost someone that was super close to them, so they got trauma, but not only that, but everybody else in the family does too. Yeah. And then on top of that, they're being re-traumatized by all the little civil things that they need to take care of, and then you got the criminal. And
right, and you got
it just goes on and on.
People all over the place coming at you.
And then you got, I was going to say, media requesting stories or statements or whatever. So we tell them to send us those people too. We'll do statements for people. We'll things Holy like cow. That. So we'll do whatever they need. And, I'm an attorney myself, and I've packed up apartments because they just couldn't go in to the house where their loved one was killed. Oh my God. I totally get that. Like I wouldn't want to go in there either. So I literally have gone in multiple apartments and just packed up everything. Wow. Good and what attorney kind of does that? So I try to be more involved than most attorneys, because the main part of my work is empathy and compassion. Yeah. Yeah. So,
well, no, that's intense. And so how long has the organization been up and going?
So officially we started in March of 2019. Okay. So, but I've been here doing the work, and everybody, all the staff that were there stayed with the new organization. Yeah. It was me and a paralegal at the time, but we've grown. We have 2 attorneys now, including myself, and then a therapist. Yeah, that's part-time as well. So like we're starting to grow a little bit, starting to expand, but officially Utah Homicide Survivors has been up since March of 2019.
That's cool though. And that was, and I know that starting a 501c3 is like intense, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
And well, I'm an accountant, and I've done a little bit with like nonprofits and stuff, but like setting them up is a nightmare. Those are not fun to set up.
doing all the forms for it, getting all of the paperwork going, and then because of the special tax status, like the only taxes that I pay is employee and payroll taxes.
Right. Yeah.
I don't pay any other taxes, but I still have to keep track of everything and say, hey, this is what we got, but I'm not paying taxes on it.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's the weirdest tax return in the world. That's the weirdest one I've ever done.
Yeah. It's the worst.
Holy cow. So these people reach out to you, you do advertising and let them know stuff, or?
We don't do a lot of advertising, mostly because there are a lot of restrictions with lawyers and advertising. I mean, how profitable would it be for me to put up a billboard that says like loved one killed? Like it's only 70 times that it happens in a given year.
Sure.
But
that makes sense.
What we will do is we'll reach out to police departments and county attorney offices where that happens and say, hey, just let you know we're here, we're free. Here, please pass this information along. And most of them will. There's a couple counties and cities that won't because they feel like it's unethical to refer a legal person over. But anyway,
that's weird.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. But hopefully eventually we're going to break through those barriers because we are so new and they're very protective. They want to make sure that no one's going to take advantage of these people again.
That's fair.
And that's how I am too.
That's fair.
So I get it. But you
got to build a little credibility.
Exactly.
Stuff like that.
And I have, and that's why other counties have started opening up. I'll have, if anyone in one county knows somebody in a different county, I'll be like, hey, can you reach out to this prosecutor for me and vouch for me, basically. Get them to refer us to their client. Or to not their client, to the victim, because prosecutors represent the state. They don't represent the victim.
Right.
And so we want to represent the victim and their family. And so look out for them and their best interests.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. And when we connected, I thought that was like super cool and something that I'd never heard of before, because it's just one of those things that it just happens once in your head. You know what I mean?
No, and that's exactly like you just see it in the news and then you forget about it until the sentencing.
And it's a good thing for people to know about, though, to get the word out there, because there's a lot of good things that happen from that. Yeah. So along with that, you have some therapy that you offer. So like trauma therapy, things like that.
Yep. So right now it's a group therapy component because it's so new. So it's an online group therapy, which we planned it to be online before COVID happened. It literally coincided with the shutdown. We had our first one at the end of March of this year. Wow. And that is like exactly when all that stuff happened. But we had known it was going to be online from the beginning because this state is pretty big. Yeah. Roughly 6 hours from one end to the other. Right. And so, it's the best way to connect people from all across the state. We have one person that joins up in Logan and Ogden. We have a couple in Salt Lake. We have some in Provo. We've got one out in Vermont or Castledale or somewhere really far out there. Yeah. And so, if we had to have it in person, we just wouldn't get the amount of people that we need to make it successful. So eventually we might transition into some other in-person type groups, but for right now, this online is fitting our needs perfectly. And then we just are starting a Spanish group now too. Oh, cool. And so trying to be more inclusive of the people that will need it, and that's a big population that also experiences a lot of victimization with homicide. Wow. Yeah, no kidding. So if somebody doesn't find you, like what's that process like? Like before someone comes to you, how soon do they come to you? The sooner the better. Yeah. Honestly, because especially in domestic violence cases. Yeah. So you have to think about it this way. If and this is terrible to think about it, but this is exactly what happens. Your spouse kills you. Who's listed on your home with you? Yeah, my spouse. Your bank accounts, your my cars, your beneficiaries, everything. Yeah. And the law says the killer can't profit from their crime, right? Yeah. It's called the Slayer statute in like regular person terms. We don't need to go into legal terms because that's not what this is. Yeah. But the law says killer can't profit from murder. But where do you stop them from profiting? It's not in the criminal case. The criminal case is for the state to go after the criminal for the criminal acts that they did. Yeah. Them inheriting something is not, it could be motive, but it's not somewhere where the court will step in the criminal side. So you have to go to the civil court. You have to go to the civil side and say, hey, they're trying to cash in on life insurance or bank accounts or cars. They're trying to sell the home. They're things like that. And so we go in and we stop them from doing that. So the sooner the better, because who knows more about your bank accounts and your life and your finances than the person who you were married to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they know how to do it. And, we've had cases where they've gotten to us within a couple days, honestly, and we were able to stop them from emptying bank accounts. Like literally the bank would call us and say, hey, somebody is trying to withdraw. Or the life insurance or the injury insurance would call and say, hey, this person filed a claim on this person's behalf. Do you know who this is? And I was like, that's the killer. And so they won't pay out because they know that we've already sent them the letters warning them, hey, this person does not get to cash in on this because they're suspected.
So how do they do that? How would somebody who perpetuated this crime go after, start emptying these bank accounts if they're...
So most of the time you can do it from jail. I mean, it's just a letter.
Oh, geez.
You can get a death certificate. It's super easy to do. Or you sign a power of attorney and have another family member or friend do all of it for you. And because what happens a lot is they know that they're not going to be getting any money because they're going to go to jail for the rest of their life, hopefully. And that's another thing in Utah. We don't have that as much as you would think. Most killers spend anywhere from 15 to 25 years in jail for murder.
Wow.
But think about it that way, though. If you've got house, car, bank account, life insurance, you could probably get probably close to $500,000 to $1 million. You get to spend 15 years in jail for it. I mean, I don't think that that's worth it, but somebody else might.
Somebody might.
And
then they store it and go from
hide it, whatever, especially if people don't get to us quick enough. Like we've literally had someone who was able to empty and drain, and we got the judgments later.
Yeah.
But once it's gone, it's gone. It's so hard to recover.
Yeah.
Unless it's a physical item that is still in their name, it's almost impossible to get back. Like we've had people hide trucks or whatever, and we've gone out and found them.
Oh, wow.
And we take them back. But there have been times where they've sold it to someone else and that person didn't know about it. And so that's an innocent purchaser. So we can't get the truck back. We can get a judgment for the money.
Yeah.
But the money is gone or hidden or given out to somebody else, and tracking it through is super hard.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of in that domestic violence situation. That's why they need to call us as quick as possible, because we prevent all of that from happening. But if it doesn't happen, I mean, there's still tons of stuff we can do. I mean, there's been cases where they've come to us a year and a half later, and there's a lot of things that we can do.
Yeah, of course.
It just depends.
But just sooner the better, right?
Yeah, always the sooner the better in general. There's a weird niche area that we've kind of carved out with cold cases. In conjunction with another group called the Cold Case Coalition. Most of these people the ones that we've carved the niche out in, at least, their bodies were never found, so you don't have a death certificate.
Right.
And why is a death certificate important? For the life insurance, for the survivor's benefits, for getting access to things. So we go and basically petition the court after there's a lot of evidence or after a certain amount of years. Hey, this person is officially deceased, or we prove that they're more likely than not deceased.
Yeah.
And actually it's more than that. It's more like anyway, legal stuff. Right. It's more like a 75% chance that they're deceased kind of thing.
Yeah.
So either they're presumed dead after a certain amount of years, or we have to show they're 75% likely to be dead.
Yeah.
And so we show that to the court if it's before the automatic timeline.
Yeah.
And so then we can get a death certificate. So then the family can get benefits and do all of that kind of stuff. So we've had cases where it's been like a year and a half, but for sure they were killed. There's just no body that they could find, but enough evidence was there. And then there's ones where it's been 5 years, disappeared without a trace. And so we'll help them get those death certificates for them.
Wow. So what's the timeline?
5 years is the presumed timeline.
So if you're gone for 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
You're presumed dead, and then you can
your family can get, but you still have to go to the court to do it.
Sure, I'm sure.
It's not like you can say, hey, they've been gone for 5 years, person, give me that. You have to go to court and get the court to declare them dead.
Wow.
Yeah. It's kind of like Batman, right?
Yeah.
That happens in Batman where Alfred's like, you've been gone, I had you declared dead.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So people don't think about it, but it's Batman.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's exactly what happened there. He was gone for 5 years. Alfred had him declared dead.
Yeah.
And then he's come back to life.
Yeah, right.
So same kind of concept. I mean, most of I would say, I haven't done it long enough to have anybody come back, but they're most likely though.
They're pretty much gone. That's intense. So you deal with those, and you know what? That's something that I'd never even thought of. Like, what if you go missing? And
what if you go missing? No body. Nothing.
Yeah, because you can't necessarily prosecute those cases without a body. In most cases,
you could, but you have to have a lot of different evidence.
Sure.
There's cases that are going on in the state right now for that, but there's always hope for the family that the person will come back, obviously.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hard for them to accept sometimes that they're never coming back.
That it's been 5 years, or we have so much evidence that this just isn't possible or whatever, right?
Exactly. And it's definitely hard, but sometimes they just want to find out what happened, and so sometimes
that's a lot of closure.
But they can't get access to certain things without a death certificate. Like you couldn't get access to bank records without a death certificate unless you're on the bank account. Yeah. Or medical things or cell phone records or whatever, unless you're on all of those things.
Wow.
So once you get the death certificate, you can start doing that.
Yeah. But before a death certificate, there's not a whole lot you can do.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's intense. I never thought about that. Good thing you came on.
And it's something that
people,
and it's something that most people don't think about.
Yeah. Because it's so intricate. There's a lot of details. There's a lot of a lot of red tape.
And I would venture to say with you have to look at with the amount of homicides there are every year, that 70 doesn't count. Those missing people don't count into that 70.
Oh yeah, that's
so
right.
You got to think about that 70. You've got about 10 survivors per homicide, so that gives us about 700 survivors per year.
Wow.
We're in a state of 4 million-ish people.
Yeah.
And again, over a 10-year period, that means we've got about 7,000 70,000 survivors.
Yeah.
I don't know. Math is hard.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not gonna.
A lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah.
Well, so what made you want to do that internship in Arizona? Like, what made you want to? Because, like, sometimes I ask people, like, did you ever think you were going to be in this position?
I just needed an internship. That's really what it was. So my aunt, so my wife is a teacher. So we're number one nonprofit lawyer and a teacher, so we get paid really, really well. But in Vermont, they literally didn't need teachers. She had applied over to 100 positions for teaching in Vermont or teaching adjacent, and got interviews in 5 of them, and got hired at one, but it was a part-time gig.
Wow.
And so they literally didn't need teachers, and that wasn't even just in Vermont. She applied even in New Hampshire because we were close enough to the New Hampshire border that she was applying in New Hampshire schools too.
Dang.
And so it was crazy.
Yeah.
And so we were there for 2 years before we're all right, we got to find her work, because we haven't had any income really. I mean, we've had a very part-time income, but during law school, you're really not encouraged to work.
Yeah, I would imagine because
your first year, you're not even allowed to really work at all. And then after that, you're not supposed to work really more than 20 hours a week.
And is that just an unwritten, unofficial kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I know for sure your first year, you're not allowed to work more than 20 hours in a week.
Wow.
But they really discourage you from working at all your first year.
Yeah.
And then after that, they say, look, you can work more, but try not to work more than 20 hours a week. And so it can be rough, but I'm not a good student. And so there's no way I could work and do law school at the same time, because it's a full-time job, because you go to school, but then you have 800 pages of reading every day.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, man.
It's crazy. That's like ridiculous. One class will be like, all right, read these next 50 pages by the time we meet for class in 2 days, and then you've got the opposite days. So every class is 50 to 100 pages of reading every day.
Yeah, I felt like that when I was in accounting.
Yeah,
like because accounting is mostly law.
Yeah,
like accounting law. Anyway,
yeah.
Right. I don't have I'm not a lawyer, but we read. I mean, you read just laws. All
you
day.
read
IRS law,
and you're I was going to say you'll be very well versed in those type of ones.
Yeah.
And in law school,
but they did. They were like, I mean, I had one time it was like 75 pages, like from 3 classes, and I was like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah,
man.
And we'd get that like per class,
Yeah,
and it was
ridiculous.
like 4 classes a day. So we'd come home with anywhere from 150 or 200 to 500 pages of reading a day.
What a mess, man.
Yeah, and then writing on top of that too, because
exactly.
you have to know the cases enough. So you have to have everything ready and summarized, and they practice the, Socrates method where they just pick on someone the whole time and they just ask you questions the whole time. So if you don't know something, like you're done. You get embarrassed. Like they'll be like, all right, tell us about this case. Oh, what about this thing? What about this thing? And if you don't know the answer, they'll move on to somebody else, but then they'll come back to you for the next question still. So you're like front and center, and they'll find a backup. But
oh my goodness. Law school sounds horrifying.
Don't ever do it. Never do it. It's funny because all lawyers will say, don't go to law school.
Yeah. You know what? I had another lawyer I interviewed on this show, and he said the exact same thing. He's like, I'm not sure if I would ever do it again, but it was there and I did it.
Yeah, exactly. All lawyers will say like, oh, don't go to law school.
Yeah.
But then we're still lawyers. Like,
but then you're still lawyers.
Yeah. But we have to be because we went to law school for it. Like, what else are we going to do?
Yeah. I think I had a conversation like that with him too. And he's like, I don't know what I would do. I'm just a lawyer now.
Yeah.
And, but that's fun. So, I mean, that's crazy. And so you said this, and I kind of wanted to just touch on it. Why is not Utah the place for life in prison for like murderers or something? I mean, I know that's such a big
Honestly,
question.
Not every state is like that.
Sure.
We have something called indeterminate sentencing, though. And this is for every crime in Utah. Every crime has something called indeterminate sentencing. So you'll see on the charges, they'll be like 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 5 to 15, 10 to life, 5 to life, 15 to life, 25 to life, things like that.
Yeah.
And so that first amount is the shortest amount of time you'll spend in prison. And the last amount is the maximum amount of time you'll spend in prison. And some homicides are 15 to life. Some are literally up to 15.
Oh,
so it could be 10 to 15.
Yeah.
Or 5 to 15 or 0 to 15 or whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
And so the judge, and that's something that maybe I think people need to be better educated about in Utah. The judges have no power over the amount of time they spend in prison.
Interesting.
In total, at least.
Interesting.
If there's a plea deal or the jury finds them guilty, they have a chart that says if you are found guilty of this crime, it is this amount of time, 0 to 15 or 5 to life or whatever it is.
And they have to
have to follow that.
Yeah.
And if there's a plea deal, they are highly encouraged to follow the plea deal. They don't necessarily have to.
Sure.
But the prosecutors make this plea deal to advance justice quicker. And a lot of people get really mad about plea deals. I think they're wonderful.
Sure.
And that's coming from someone who is there for the victims.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're wonderful is because the victims don't have to go through the trial. A murder trial, minimally, is 2 years before you'll get to trial.
Why? That's crazy.
Just how long it takes.
Yeah,
so I'll get people
everything together
to get everything ready for trial. It's a full trial will take a minimum of 2 years.
Wow.
Minimum. Like most of them are going to be a little over 2.5 is probably the more average amount.
That's crazy.
If it's shorter than 2 years, you can pretty much bet that there was a plea deal.
Oh, wow. I see where you're coming from. Like,
because they want to be done with this,
and
they don't want to have to worry about testifying.
That would be scary.
Or going through and having their loved one's character destroyed, because that's what the defense's job is to destroy the character or the evidence that the state has. And so the plea deals are always done, or at least should always be done, with the permission or at least with the input of the family. They don't have to follow. If the family says we don't want a plea deal, the prosecutors have that independence to say, well, we're still offering it.
Yeah,
but they have to tell them before they offer the plea deal. So they'll say, hey, look, we're thinking about offering this plea deal. What do you think? And they'll talk to them about the pros and cons of the plea. Yeah. Some prosecutors will be like, I'm not offering one unless you want me to. And so that's up to the prosecutor. Not all prosecutors will do that. Yeah. Some counties are way busier than other counties. You know, you'll have a really populous county like Salt Lake County where they're going to handle, you know,
a majority,
30 to 40 homicide cases a year. Yeah. Because they're going to be in the majority. It's probably more closer to like 25 or 30, but still a lot. And then you get ones like Uinta County or Emery County or Wasatch County where they might get one in a year.
Like, that'd be, maybe one or something like that.
And so the intensity of those trials plays a factor, I think, into that, whether the prosecutor's going to seek a plea deal or not. And most of them still will, because getting the trials done quicker is better for the families in the long run.
Jeez. But well, no, it is. I mean, but that's just crazy. Like a lot more understanding comes from that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people don't, like, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so what do you do? Right.
Yep. Well, and then going back
and to then in the meantime, right? So let's say you end up going to trial or something like that. Yeah. Or even if it takes a year and a half to reach a plea or something like that. You still got all this stuff that you got to deal with.
Exactly. Jeez. And then when they're sentenced, going back to that indeterminate sentencing. Yeah. The judge will say, okay, you've pled guilty to this. It holds a punishment of this. So let's say 15 to life. So they could be out in 15 years. Yeah. And who decides that? It's the Board of Pardons and Parole.
Oh, interesting.
So they really have way more power than judges, in my opinion, as far as keeping someone in jail.
Oh, interesting.
And that goes for any kind of victimization or crime. Sure. Any type of crime that is committed, the Board of Pardons is really who determines how long they're going to stay in there.
Interesting. And how do you pick who's on the Board of Pardons?
The governor.
The governor just be.
Yeah. Well, they're appointed, I should say. Legislature. Either I believe the legislature confirms them. I couldn't tell you for sure. That's not something I'm super versed in. But I do know that the governor does pick people to serve on that. Yeah. And whether they're confirmed or not by the legislature, I couldn't tell you.
But But does your nonprofit do any lobbying or sort of things for...
Nonprofits aren't really supposed to lobby. Because that's against their nonprofit missions usually. You can't spend a lot of time. So there might be some things where we will say, hey, we've seen this in our thing while doing our work. We've seen something that's really disturbing or that's hurting victims. Please help us fix it.
Yeah. And so I guess, because I went through that, and I guess lobbying might be a little too strong of a word, but we
educate the legislative and legislature about the different things. So we go there, we'll ask for funds sometimes. We haven't received any yet because we're so new, but we've asked for it. And or sometimes legislators will call us and say, hey, I had someone in my district that was killed and they've brought this to my attention. What do you think of this? And I'll say, this is a common issue. And they say, how would you fix it? And so I'll consult with that on that. So hopefully we've got some legislatures this year that have called us about trying to fix some issues. So we might have some bills that we would say that this would help, and it's not necessarily lobbying if it directly affects our people that we serve. So we're not there to get involved in politics. We take no political stances or anything like that.
Nonprofits can't do that. They can't back like a party or a candidate or anything like that. But what I meant was
if there's a law that's going to affect us, we can state our position on that law.
Exactly.
And so that's really I should say the amount of lobbying that we do would be that kind of, hey, we'd like to see something like this, or we support this, or we don't support this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's so crazy. And you just, how many, you haven't been in for that long, but how many on average do you handle in a year?
So on even when you were in Arizona, of the 70 that happen per year, we probably get about 30% of those, so 20 to 22 in a year. But these cases take a long time, just like in the criminal case, how that can take 2 years. Yeah. Our minimum cases take very, very minimally 6 months. Yeah. Most of them are at least a year to a year and a half. I have one case where we're in the third year now.
Jeez. And you're still fielding.
Still doing stuff for them. And so we get new cases. We have cases that we finish. New cases come in.
Yeah.
But that's why we had to hire a second attorney to help with that workload. And the beginnings of the cases are always a lot more intense than the middles.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is just getting filings, getting things frozen, finding the assets, making sure nobody takes them.
Yeah.
And then it's a waiting game.
Jeez.
And then after the waiting game, it's a bunch of filings to get everything closed and distributed over to the people who need it.
Wow. And so, and now this is kind of like your thing. You're passionate about it.
Oh, yeah.
You're rolling, man.
Yeah, this is, I stumbled into it, which a lot of people in the victims world stumble into their work and they become really passionate about it. And that's kind of how it was for me. It's something that I know that is what I want to be doing, at least for the foreseeable future. Maybe not forever, but because you can get burnt out easily.
Oh, and I'm sure with some of the stories that you hear,
Oh yeah, and I see a lot of things that people don't ever get to see, even in the news or things like that. I see pictures, videos, police reports, things like that never get released.
And do you? Is that part of your job? Like, do you seek out those things? Or
sometimes we need to, but sometimes the family also wants that for closure. And so we'll do that. We'll help them get those things and encourage them to do that with a therapist or someone that's a safe person, because it can be really hard to read what happened. But and then on the side, on top of all of that, with all the victimizations, I have a podcast where we literally just talk about victims of crime and survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people need that, though. There's the true crime podcast world is big, but it's only on like the people, like the crimes, right?
Yeah, so they look at it from like, oh, look at all these news sources or videos or dramatizations that 60 Minutes did or whatever.
Right.
And so what we do, it's called Utah Survivors Podcast. It's a very, we call ourselves a different kind of true crime podcast, because what we do is we bring in the survivor themselves. They tell us their story how they want it to be told.
Yeah.
So we might talk about all the details.
Yeah.
And it's not just homicide stuff. So a lot of it is domestic violence related. So stalking, domestic violence, abuse, rape, sexual assault, molestations, sex trafficking, human trafficking, things like that. And so they'll come on and they'll tell their story the way they want it told. If they don't want to talk about the actual crime that happened, they don't have to.
Yeah.
Because it can be super traumatic.
Yeah, that's hard.
And so if they don't want to talk about everything that happened, and we try not to even make it so it won't be triggering for other people that have gone through it too.
Right.
Because you never know, someone might be listening to it and go, oh, this is exactly what happened to me.
Yeah.
And we don't want...
And now now we got a couple...
Exactly. And so we wanted to make it a place where everybody feels safe and they can talk about their experiences in their victimizations. And so they'll talk more about like the criminal process or how they're doing now. And we'll still talk a little bit about what happened and how it happened. But we don't talk about exactly all the details, because it's not something that everybody needs to know.
Yeah.
And then the week after that, we follow it up with a nonprofit that helps, or government agency that helps people in similar situations.
Wow. Oh, nice.
So, for instance, if someone was talking to us about how they were raped, then we'll talk with an organization like UCASA, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Oh, nice.
And so they help victims of rape find services for them, or someone's trying to get a divorce from their abusive husband. We'll talk to Utah Legal Services or Salt Lake Legal Aid or Timpanogos Legal Center, places that help people that want a divorce from their abusive spouse to get them that resource.
Yeah, that would be an interesting conversation too.
Yeah.
How do you get those people out safely?
Exactly.
Whew.
Or like we'll talk with a victim advocate who does safety planning.
Oh yeah.
And so that's a big part of their work, or protective orders or things like that. And so it's not only is it there for them to hear stories, or for anyone really to hear stories about this happen, but then they'll know the resources, because one in 3 women in Utah and 1 in 4 men in Utah are victims of domestic violence at some point in their life.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And it's a little higher than the nationwide average too. So in nationwide, it's 1 in 4 and 1 in 7, I believe, for men.
I think you're right.
Might be 1 in 6, but it's still close to there. And so we're higher than average on both of those.
That's
again,
crazy.
Not the highest,
not the highest,
but higher than the rest of the country. And so guaranteed you know a victim of domestic violence. You might not know that, but you know a victim of some type of domestic violence.
Right.
Or domestic criminalization kind of thing, or a victim of a domestic crime, which that can include stalking, including sexual assault or rape or molestation or abuse or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this podcast is there for random everyday people too, to be able to go, oh my gosh, my friend is going through this, or their friend comes and tells them that, oh, I know the resource for you now.
Oh yeah, which is super powerful. Like a lot of more people need to know how to deal with that on a day-to-day basis.
Oh yeah. I mean? And I see people all the time, whether it's on like Facebook or messaging boards or whatever, just because I try to figure out ways to help as many people as possible. I'll see that and be like, oh, you need to go to this organization.
Wow.
And so, that's try to connect them with that resource, because that's something I'm passionate about, is helping all victims of crime, not just homicides. Homicide is I would say my main focus and passion, but I still want to help as much people as possible.
Yeah. And is that in Utah Homicide and then the podcast, those are the only things you dabble in right now?
Yeah, pretty much. There's always big plans for expansion and things like that.
Yeah.
Eventually we want to take on certain types of divorce cases where the victimization or the criminality of the victimization has been fully prosecuted, because we can use that to get the victim more assets of the marriage when they get divorced.
Oh, yeah.
Because federal guidelines and restrictions is you can't use their money for injury actions.
Oh, that's interesting.
So mostly because they don't want to be sued.
Yeah.
And so you can't use their money to sue them. So they just put a blanket ban on what they call tort, which is injury. So, you ever see the billboards, the one calls or the accidentes or whatever else, all of those are called tort actions. So when you're injured, it's a tort, not a delicious English dessert.
Yeah, that's right.
But the federal government doesn't allow you to use their money to do that kind of work.
Okay.
So,
well, geez, that's so sticky, huh?
Yeah, and so why you got people like you. I always think that there should be exceptions to it, but federal government doesn't fully fund our program.
Sure.
So, and that's the main reason they don't fully fund our program, so that way we can do things like that.
So you can make.
So we'll do wrongful death cases with our homicide part of our thing, and that is not covered by the federal government grants. So our time on that, we have to document our time. Okay, this week I spent 3 hours on the wrongful death case. So that 3 hours cannot come from the federal government. It has to come from our pot of money over here that we have separate from fundraising or donations or whatever.
Yeah, man, there's too much. Yeah, there's too much legal like nonprofit legal accounting.
Yeah, especially when you have government grants.
Oh yeah, that's ridiculous.
And we have like a reimbursement grant. So if we don't spend it, we don't get it.
Yeah, that's even harder.
So we have to spend the money first and then say, hey, can we have our money back? And then they'll do an audit and be like, hey, you said you spent, and this is a real scenario and it was a typo, but they're like, you said you spent $136.71 here, but you actually spent let's say it was $137.61, but you actually spent $136.71. So you owe us 90 cents.
Yeah.
And we have to give them 90 cents back.
Yeah, I know. The government's ridiculous.
and it's to protect, and there are people out there that have taken advantage of that system, and that's why they have to do this.
Well, a nonprofit organization's probably in the top 5 ways to launder money.
Oh yeah,
all the time.
And people don't realize that there's a lot of organizations out there. Nonprofit does not mean you don't make money.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What it really means is non-taxable.
Yeah.
Because technically,
people don't get that.
The NFL is a nonprofit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And look how much money they make.
They make tons of money.
And they have things that they pay taxes on because it's not officially affiliated with their charitable purpose.
Yeah.
But for the most part, a lot of their stuff is nonprofit.
Yeah.
And so and there's other organizations out there. I mean, that bring in tons of money, and their people get paid a lot.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of good work out there, and the bigger the organization, the more overhead.
Yeah.
And even the small organizations, depending on what you're doing, like we have a large amount of overhead because all of our services all of our charitable work is services. We don't charge.
Yeah, which is like a whole different ballgame.
And we literally do not charge them one penny.
Yeah.
So
that's crazy.
There's court fees.
Yeah.
and other legal fees like that we don't control. So it's not like an attorney will charge you $200 an hour and all the fees.
Yeah.
We charge $0 an hour and none of the fees.
Yeah.
And just the fees and things alone, the cost of one of the cases can be anywhere from, depending on the type of case, $2,000 to $20,000, depending on what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we don't charge them anything.
Right.
And so, we hope to be able to continue to do that, but not every time we're able to. So there might be a case where we don't have the fees anymore and they have to pay that $500 to cover a court filing fee or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and the government will a lot of times with services do fair value, and they might not do fair value where you live.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
They'll do fair value in the, like, out of all the attorneys who do exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. They're like, oh, hey, the rural attorneys, they get $150 an hour.
Yeah.
And you are in the big city where it's $250 an hour. And
exactly.
that's not what we're making, and that's not even close to what we're making.
Yeah, no.
I wish I was making that.
Right.
But that's for the services they actually, when they're actually working and doing, because a lot of attorney time might not be working on the billable parts of their clients' cases.
Yeah, you might be doing paperwork.
But exactly. Yeah. And so for us, we try to make it so they literally have to pay $0 to as little as possible. And even for things like packing up the apartment and shipping it. Yeah. So we shipped an entire apartment to another state, and I won't say because I don't. Sure. It could potentially easily with people finding us. But it cost like over $2,500 to ship all this stuff to where the family was living.
I'm sure, yeah, man.
And we didn't have them pay one penny.
That's crazy. That's good for you, man.
And so that's what we try to do, because and so that's our overhead really. And so like when some of these like charitable certificates or like organizations will be like, well, this organization spends, like Red Cross. Yeah. They're like 70, 80 or more % on overhead. Staff and the things that they're giving out to people, warehouses, buildings, things like that. Yep. But look at how much they do compared. If they were to lower their overhead, they would not be providing more.
Well, because overhead's different in a nonprofit. Like it's a different definition in a nonprofit than it would be.
Because salaries are included as overhead in nonprofit.
Yeah, exactly.
And we still deserve to be paid for our work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this is all 100%. That I do.
Yeah,
I'm full-time doing this. I could go out and get another lawyer job and do this on the side, but I wouldn't be able to help those 25 families
in the same
a
way.
year.
Yeah,
exactly.
For
I maybe would be able to do 5 families a year.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because like as an accountant, like that's one thing that I try to teach people all the time is that like nonprofit doesn't mean what you think it means.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I love it when people approach me for like, hey, I want to start a nonprofit doing this. I'm like, okay, first thing, how are you looking to get paid, or are you just looking to do a service? And like, oh, if they're looking to get paid, it's a long road. And
it is a long road.
Only reason I am so successful at what it was is because I was with another organization that already did all that legwork. So I knew how to get it started right away. Yeah. If I was just starting it from the beginning, I would still be unpaid doing this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's tough, man. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people don't get that. Well, so how do people, if they want to get a hold of you, if somebody wants a referral or something like that, how do they reach you?
Yeah. So they can go to our website, UtahHomicideSurvivors.org.
Cool.
Also, we have a Facebook, Instagram. We technically have a Twitter, but not super active on that. It's just at Utah Survivors.
Okay.
And for the podcast, if people want to access it, it's UtahSurvivors.org, not Utah Homicide Survivors, but UtahSurvivors.org.
Okay.
And then we have our Instagram, which is Utah Survivors Podcast, and same with our Facebook at Utah Survivors Podcast. And so reach us on there. It's got donate buttons on both of those kind of pages if people wanted to do that, or if they want to get involved, there's little inquiry buttons where you can fill out and say, hey, I want to volunteer, I want to help, want to donate something. We do auctions a couple times. We're doing another one here in November for the Christmas season. So we're getting items to auction off online and things like that.
Cool.
So just trying to help, with all this COVID stuff, we had to cancel most of our events, and so I bet fundraising changed. We have to raise about $50,000 in cash every year to survive.
Oh, wow.
And so we are about $7,000 short for that year. So it's like our last little push. We gotta try to raise it. And so, that's other ways of helping. But we also interns or volunteers or people that just sometimes want to sit with the victim's family in the court, things like that, just to help make sure that they feel loved and protected. That's a big thing too. But we also vet people like that very closely, because some people are just looking to know the drama about everything that was happening, because we live in that true crime world.
Yeah, no kidding, man.
So we're just trying to, we make sure that, exactly. And we want to make sure the victims feel safe.
Absolutely.
And so.
Well, that's great, man. Holy cow. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me. And good luck in all of this, bro.
Thanks.